Day 16. Deuteronomy 16:1-17. Deuteronomy 16:1-17, NKJV. Observe the month of Abib and keep the pass of Abib. The Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. Therefore you shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God, from the flock and the herd, in the place where the Lord chooses to put his name. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it, that is the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. That you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. And no leaven shall be seen among you in all your territory for 7 days, nor shall any of the meat which you sacrifice the first day at twilight remain overnight until morning. You may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates which the Lord your God gives you, but at the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide, there you shall sacrifice the Passover at twilight, at the going down of the sun at the time you came out of Egypt. And you shall roast and eat it in the place which the Lord your God chooses, and in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a sacred assembly to the Lord your God. You shall do no work on it. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. Then you shall keep the feast of weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite who is within your gates, the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are among you, at the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. And you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, when you have gathered from your threshing floor and from your winepress. And you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless and the widow, who are within your gates. 7 days you shall keep a sacred feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you surely rejoice. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses. At the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks and at the feast of tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God which he has given you. UCG Bible Commentary, Deuteronomy 16:1-17. Early spring, late spring and fall festivals, holy day offerings 3 times a year. Here some of God's 7 annual festivals are listed and reviewed. The sacrifices that God later added to accompany these feasts are no longer in effect. The festivals themselves, however, are still to be observed. Following the Passover, God commanded that the Israelites were not to eat leavened bread for 7 days, but were to instead eat unleavened bread during that time. Verses 3-8. No leaven was to be seen among them in all their territory for those 7 days. Verse 4. The days of unleavened bread. 7 weeks later, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, was to be kept. Verse 9. Next would be the Feast of Trumpets, followed by the Day of Atonement, but neither are mentioned here nor is the last great day. However, the Feast of Tabernacles is specifically reviewed. Verses 13-15. This does not mean that trumpets, atonement, and the last great day are no longer holy. Rather, God is listing here only the 3 seasons of his annual festivals, as can be seen in verse 16. The first season, early spring, includes Passover and unleavened bread. The next season, late spring approaching summer, refers to Pentecost, and the third season, late summer and fall, includes trumpets, atonement, tabernacles, and the last great day. These feasts are all to be kept within a period of less than a month. As part of the instructions for keeping his festivals, God also commanded that we come before him with an offering during each of the 3 festival seasons. Verse 16. Generally, the Israelites made 3 trips in order to worship together in the 3 festival seasons. Many of the offerings were produce or animals, so it may have been practical for families to turn over their offerings as soon as they arrived at the place of worship. However, since offerings today are usually in the form of money, checks, cash, etc., and since God does command that we are not to appear before him empty-handed, the Church of God in modern times has instituted a tradition of taking up offerings on each holy day, the days on which God specifically commands us to appear before him in assembly for worship services. Why did God specify only the males? It was assumed that each family was headed by a man, and the man presented the family's offering. Even today there is often just one offering from each family, though many parents encourage their children to each give a small amount in order to teach them the habit of giving to God. Finally, it should be mentioned that God does not set any amount for us to give except that it be according to the blessing of the Lord your God which He has given you. Verse 17. Of course, this cannot mean that we are to put a price tag on all that God has given us and try to pay Him that, for we could never in a million lifetimes pay that much. Rather, it must refer to the clause in the first part of the same verse, that we are to give as we are able, or, more to the point, as God has enabled us.